Hey guys, it's Chandler Vincent with weldermade.com. Welcome back. Let's weld some stainless today. So this is for the month of April. Go ahead and check the bottom right hand corner of your blueprint and make sure that part number matches the part number on my blueprint, and we'll get started. So step one is looking at the parts. Let's figure out what parts are what, how many parts we're supposed to have, and we'll go from there. So part number one is your base plate. It is a 5x6 rectangle with round corners on all four sides. Number two, there is one piece, and it is this big square piece that's a 4x3 square. And then number three is this odd looking shape. It's got your rectangle cut into it for your purge hose. There's one of those. Part number four, there's two of them. Odd looking shape here. You should have two pieces that are mirrored. Put the dross side facing down and make sure that they are opposites. Number five is the big piece with the logo. Okay, number six is this rectangle that is 1.75 wide and 4 inches long. Number seven is the same shape as number three, just without a rectangle hole in the middle. And number eight, there's two of them. There's these two little rectangle pieces. And then number nine is a lot like it, just a little shorter. It's 2 inches wide. And that is for the very top of the assembly. So we should have 11 parts total. I'm gonna go ahead and count mine. Okay, I've got 11 parts. Make sure you have 11 parts. Make sure we have everything you need in your box. And we'll get started to step two, which is the cleaning process. So the main thing I wanna do is get rid of that dross on the backside and clean the weld face. Get rid of that burr, get rid of any of that oxidized layer, and we'll be good to go. After that, I will rub them down with some cleaning chemicals, get rid of any surface grease, any fingerprints or anything like that, and we'll be ready to go into step three, which is the tacking up process. So let's get these parts clean and I'll get back with you. Okay, now I'm going to rub them down with the cleaning chemical, get rid of any surface contaminants that may be on the parts. Okay, now that all that cleaning is done, we're going to transfer over to the Easy Tack tool, and we're going to start tacking up this project, which is step three. Okay, now that we got the Easy Tack tool set up, let's get this thing tacked together. We're going to start with parts 4 and 6. Okay, now we're just going to rotate that over, reclamp it, and go to our second piece of part number 4. Okay, I'm just doing nice light little fusion tacks. You don't need a lot. What you want to make sure is you don't want to melt away those corners too far, because that's what you use as a reference point when you're putting all these parts together. So make sure you do a quick little fusion tack. Don't make it too big, that way it's not in the way of other parts. And just try to keep them as clean as possible. Okay, now we're just going to rotate that over one more time. Now we're good for part number 2, which is this big plain rectangle. Okay, now we have parts 6, 4, and 2 tacked together. And that is the bottom of our assembly. I'm going to set that aside, and now we are going to tack together parts 9, 7, and our 2/8. So I'm going to start with the part number 7 that does not have the hole. So this is part 7, and this is part 3. See the difference? They're the same size. One just has a rectangle in it, and that's going to go on the back side of the project, and that's where we're going to put in our purge hose later. So grab part 7. And then part 8. So let me show you the difference between part 8 and part 9. See that? They're the same width, but one's just a little taller. The little taller one is part 8. There's 2 of them. So right now we're going to do part 8 and part 7. dross side down. Now that those are tacked together, we're just going to rotate it over one more time. Grab our other number 8. Okay, now that we have the Easy Tacks tool set aside, we've got this assembly, which is our 1/7 and 2/8. Now we're going to drop part 9 right on top. Okay, now that we have that assembly tacked together, we're going to flip it over and tack part number 3 onto the back side. Okay, now that we have these two assemblies tacked together, you can go ahead and just set this assembly on top of this one. Make sure this back butt joint's nice and flush. Okay, now for the final piece of the puzzle. It is part number 5. We're going to go ahead and just set this right in here, butt it up nice and tight. Get it tacked in there. Okay, now it's time to get our assembly tacked onto our base plate. We are exactly 1 inch away from both edges, so I'm going to take my calipers, set them at 1 inch, give it a scratch down both sides, and then you are an overhead corner joint on that back side. So that's going to be one of the most important parts of getting the base plate tacked together straight, is that that's a nice weldable corner joint on that bottom side. If you had a gap in that bottom corner joint, it'd be really hard to get a good purge. So pay attention to this bottom corner joint. Make sure that it is nice and straight and no gaps. Okay, now I'm going to go around the project and put a nice tack on all the corners. Make sure this butt joint is fused together in a couple places, and make sure that this project isn't going to start warping when I weld it. So make sure that you have sufficient tacks on all corners of the project, and make sure that those butt joints don't start warping out, because it makes it really hard to keep a nice consistent straight bead if your plates are warping. Okay, that is ready to weld. Let me give you a little bit of history about our logo. So we knew you guys would be tacking this logo on a bunch of different projects, so we wanted to make the logo work both directions. So you guys will notice that there's a W and an M when it's that direction, and when you flip it, it is also a WM. So don't worry about the rotation of the Welder Made logo. You cannot screw it up. No matter what you do, you'll always have a WM in that logo. So don't worry about the orientation. Okay, let's talk a little bit about a purge. So, in the past videos, I have not purged any of the projects, so I can show you that it's possible. So some of you out there that are at home that may not have the equipment to purge, you can do these projects without a purge on the inside. And let me tell you what a purge is. So, what we're doing is we're purging all of the oxygen, the atmospheric pressure, out of the project. And we're filling it up with 100% pure argon, and that is the same gas that's coming out of your TIG torch. And the reason why we do that is because when we're melting on that back side, if there's pure oxygen, you're going to start oxidizing on that back side, and that's going to pull into your weld pool and start making your weld pool swirl and get turbulent, and that is not desirable, and it makes it a lot harder to weld. It also does another thing for you. When argon comes out of the bottle, it is naturally cold. So what it does is it kind of chills the inside of your project, and it always runs cold air in and hot air out. So it helps the project stay a little cooler. So with those two things, it's really beneficial. So what we're going to do is we're going to just take some regular masking tape. Any tape's going to work. We're going to tape over this logo, and then we're going to put a piece of tape over this hole. Then I'm going to make a little slit with my knife. I'm just going to poke a little hose in there, and then I'm going to turn it to about 5 psi. It's a really small project. You don't need a lot of pressure. And argon is heavier than air, so it's going to slowly start building up in the bottom and pushing all the oxygen out the top. I'm going to give it a little bit of time, and I'm going to let it purge all that oxygen out, and then we'll start welding. Let's get started. Like I said before, argon is naturally heavier than oxygen. So the way I have it here is the purge hole is towards the top half of the project. And that is so that the whole project can fill full of argon and push the oxygen out the top. So I've got my hose shoved clear to the bottom of the project. I have a little bit of opening inside there with the tape, and that's a hole. That is okay. You need to have somewhere for the oxygen to come out of the project. So I have a little bit of an opening there. I'm filling the project full of argon from the bottom up. That's going to push all the oxygen out the top, and then we'll have a perfectly purged project, and we can get started, and we won't have any oxidization on the backside, and we're going to find that this project will weld a lot cleaner and it'll look a lot better in the end. So if it's possible, I would purge the projects. It's very affordable to get some purge equipment. All you need is a hose with a fitting on the end that can go to a regulator that goes on an argon bottle. The way I have it set up is I have a dual regulator on my bottle on my welder, and I just plug my purge hose into the other side of that regulator, and I can adjust the pressure individually from my welder. And no matter where my welder is, I have a purge set up, and it works out perfect. So let's get started on the welding process. This part has been sitting here purging for about 5 minutes. We are ready to go. I'm going to start by welding this horizontal butt joint, and then I'm going to rotate it, weld these horizontal skewed fillet joints, and I'm going to come up here and do these outside corners, and then we'll tie it all in together with these outside welds going vertical. I want to try to get you guys to think about heat management when it comes to these projects. One of the hardest things about these stainless projects is how thin the material is, how many weld inches, and the amount of arc time on one project. This project is going to get really hot. It's going to start welding differently as you progress through the project. So there's a couple things you can do. One, a purge is going to help because you're going to have that cool argon flowing on the inside of the project. Two, start adventuring into a pulser on your welder if you have it. If not, that is just fine. But with a pulse setting, you have less arc time, which means less heat. So the third thing is don't be afraid to just walk away from the project, let it cool, or get a little wet rag and start dabbing it and start quenching the heat out of this project. Don't let it get too hot. Once it's too hot, all the practice goes out the window, the frustration level goes up, and we don't learn anything. Focus on heat management, and it'll help your weldability. Let's get started. Okay everyone, the Scotch tape wasn't working on this project because we have too many weld inches near that hole. It's too hot for the tape, which is a very common problem that you will run into in industry. So it's not the end of the world. There's a couple things you can do. A lot of guys like to use aluminum foil that you use for cooking, and you can crunch it up and shove it in the hole, and that'll clog it. But I also like to use just plain old steel wool. And that's okay because we like air to be able to flow out just as much as we like air to flow in. You do not want to build pressure in your project, and you want that oxygen to be able to flow out. So I'm just going to stuff this steel wool in this hole with my hose. And we are good to go. So normally we etch the logo onto these projects, but this month we cut the logo out instead of etching. In the future we are only going to etch, that way you guys don't have to worry about covering up that logo when you're purging. So that'll be the last time you guys have to worry about that. I want to get all these horizontal joints finished. That way I can do these verticals, tie them all in, and only have 2 craters at the very top of the project. So now I'm going to come over here to parts 6 and 5, do this horizontal skewed fillet joint. Make sure you do not start welding with oxidized filler wire. It's going to immediately affect the beginning of your weld pool. So it doesn't hurt just to hurry and clip those off. And if you can, get in a habit of leaving that filler wire in that pre-flow when you're done welding to let everything cool, and it'll shield that filler wire and you won't ever have to clip the end of your filler wire again. That tape's getting a little hot, but that's okay, it's not hurting anything. I want you guys to focus on trying to have fast travel speeds, and here's why. So the amount of arc time on here is what really affects heat. And when we're talking about heat management, if you can just move a little bit faster with your weld techniques, overall throughout the whole project, you're going to have less weld time, and less weld time equals less heat, and less heat equals more weldability when it comes to thin stainless. So try to figure out a method that allows you to move when welding fast. An old instructor of mine by the name of Mason Winters always had the phrase hot and fast, and I love that to a point. I don't like to weld too hot, but I like to weld hot enough that my travel speed can be fast, therefore I can have less weld time when it comes to industry and when it comes to practice and dealing with heat sensitive parts like this one. So it's something to think about, but I also want you to be comfortable. Don't go so fast that you start getting uncomfortable and your weld quality goes down. There is a happy medium, and the more you weld, the faster you will be able to move. So it all takes time, and it all takes hood time. So don't get discouraged, don't give up, keep practicing, and you'll get better. Okay, that is all my horizontal welds. Now I'm going to start doing all these outside corner joints in the vertical progression, and I'm going to bring them up and tie everything up here in the middle, and I'm only going to have 2 craters left on this whole project. Okay, I touched my tungsten, happens to the best of us. I'm going to swip that out real quick. That is what guides your arc. It's very important. It can handle a little bit of contamination, but if you have a very big glob or anything wrong with the tip of that tungsten, I would change it. That is exactly what forms your arc and what manages your arc. If it is not consistent throughout the project, you will have different results. So focus on the cleanliness of your tungsten. If you touch it with your filler wire, that's okay. It happens to everybody. Switch it out. Make sure you're welding with the clean tungsten. Okay, that side of the project's getting pretty hot, so I'm going to transfer over to this side, start welding up this side, and if it still feels like it's getting too hot, I'm going to give it a little bit of time to cool off, but we will see by bouncing around the project if we can even out the heat. I'm going to remove my purge hose for the last weld here so I don't burn my hose. Okay, I've put my purge hose back in for this fillet weld in this overhead corner. I'm going to go ahead and start with the overhead corner and wrap that fillet weld all the way around, and that will be all the welding on this project. Okay guys, that's it for the month of April. Thank you very much for being here with me. I hope you learned something today. Feel free to reach out to me if there's any questions you have. I want you guys to be learning everything you possibly can with these projects. I'm really excited to meet back with you next month. We will start Chalk Talk videos on our YouTube channel where we will go more in depth with all of the welding information, the torch setups, how to purge, why we purge, and stuff like that. So these videos, I want to make sure you guys are getting these projects tacked up and getting the general idea of welding these projects. So thank you very much for being a Welder Made subscriber. I'll see you next month. Thanks.